guess we'll start because, of course the snow started right on cue at 5:25, unfortunately. But we're all here, and it's not going to last, and it's not going to be slippery when you leave, and we're going to have a wonderful night. But Elena has some announcements before we introduce our guest.
Yes. If you haven't seen it already, we do have our April newsletter out on the circulation desk. So coming up next week, we actually have several things happening because it is April vacation week. First up on Tuesday, so a week from today, we have Mark Swidem joining us, and he is a storyteller, so he'll be here at 6 p.m. on Tuesday the 16th. And then we also have on Wednesday the 17th at 6 p.m., just to celebrate Patriots Day a little bit, we've got the Piscataqua Rangers Junior Fife and Drum Corps coming. And it's not the entire drum corps. They said they'd be a little too loud for all of us in here. But we have a large number of them coming to perform for us. And then on Friday, April 19th, so that's the Friday before Easter, we are having our spring bake sale. And that will take place all during our open hours on Friday, which is 9:30 to 1:30. If you're a baker, we'd love to have your support. You can just let us know at the Circ desk if you'd be willing to make something for us. And anything we don't sell on Friday will be available on Saturday for sale. And then lastly, at the end of the month, on Wednesday, April 24th at 6 p.m., we have a program called Experiences in Cuba with Robert Ortiz. He is actually the photographer we have on display right now. Before you leave, make sure you check out down the walls in the back of the library as well. So he'll be talking about his experiences doing photography outside the tourist areas in Cuba. Sharon will introduce Paul.
Okay. So tonight's guest, Paul Lally, is currently the producer of Ciao Italia with Mary Ann Esposito, and that's the longest running cooking show on TV. And I'm just pulling out a few things that you're going to fill everyone else in. But tonight what we're going to talk about is Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which Paul worked with Fred Rogers for over 10 years. 40 years in the television business and with PBS and all across the country, and you have enriched so many children's lives with Fred Rogers. I remember as a young person growing up in the 60s, and screen time back then, as you all know, was sitting around the TV with your family and watching what your father wanted to watch, which was usually World War II, film and, World at War. Except it was always around like 4 o'clock that my mother would be cooking dinner, and, my brother, I have a younger brother, he's 7 years younger, and she would be like, we had a small house, just go, Mr. Rogers must be on. And that was the one time we had the TV to ourselves. And we had the room to ourselves, living room, everyone was in it. And it was the one time that, although we were just little children watching that, we knew he was talking to us. And so when you read about his story and his biography and the way he thought little children heard, I'm living proof of that, because I remember I was a little older, so I would sit there with my younger brother, but he was just captivated, and he was spoken to by Fred Rogers. And it was a time when children were talked to, and they got what they needed as far as affirmation of who they were. And I think Fred was the first person that I know of that really gave children that. And it was just a wonderful program, and we are so fortunate to have Paul Lally here to tell us about it. If you haven't seen this, it's a wonderful documentary. We have it here at the library. This is also a beautiful book.
It's a new one, yeah.
It's the new book on poetry, and it's his songs and the beautiful artwork and all. We've been passing it around. Kids haven't even seen it yet until we're done. But it's great. I read several of these to my little granddaughter, and she's only 3. And yet sitting there reading them to her, she's just captivated. He's just got this magic. And then, of course, The Good Neighbor. And this is another biography by Maxwell King. So please help me welcome Paul Lally.
Okay. That's for sure. Your comment about Fred would talk to children, and I remember at a time when I was there, just before I even start that, they did a study, and with children would pay attention, they would categorize this. Kids would pay attention to three things on television, focus on. One were commercials, because there were commercials. Second were newscasts, and the third was Mr. Rogers, because the constant with all those three is that the person, a newscaster, when they're giving you news, assumes you're an adult. They talk to you like this. So a child's there. Got it. And the same thing with Fred. He would say, there's no one in the world exactly like you, and people can like you just the way you are. And he looks at you, and the kid goes, check, got it. And Ernest Hemingway, Fred didn't do this, but Ernest Hemingway wrote that human beings have a built-in shock-proof bullshit detector. Okay? And children, time to the 10th power. Okay? So one of the things that are guidelines, and I wrote for the program as well as directed it, was you didn't, you told the truth all the time. You didn't fool around. And so now I'm getting a little ahead of my story, but I worked for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood for 10 years in the early 90s early 80s to the early 90s. And it was my big break. I had been working in public television for 10 years prior to that. And one of the things that people always will ask me is, was Fred really like that? Come on. Because for some reason I'm supposed to know, which I do. And I'd always say, yeah. And when you look in the mirror tomorrow morning, and you're brushing your hair or you're shaving or whatever, you are who you are. And Fred was the same way. He was who he was off camera and on camera. He just looked at you. And I think that Fred had a little more of an advantage over us, is that he had hand puppets to work with. Okay. So all of us have multiple, sides to our personality. Everybody does. We're happy, we're sad, we're feeling good mood, we're angry, and Fred had puppets. So King Friday the 13th was that side of Fred which wanted to be in charge and be the boss. And then Sarah Saturday, Queen Sarah Saturday was King Friday's wife. She would not put up with any of that nonsense. So she spoke truth to power. And Lady Elaine was another puppet, and Daniel Striped the Tiger was a shy puppet. So all these different parts of personalities, Fred embodied them in the puppets. And here's why he did that. Everything was thought out. It wasn't, as Fred said, it wasn't a kid show where people were throwing pies at people. You thought it out. And in fairy tales, you have witches and Red Riding Hood and the hunter and the wolf and the grandma. You have all these personalities. And in a child, and we aimed at a three, I think it was like preschool to kindergarten. So we weren't talking to you, we were talking to a preschooler. And you were older at the time, and you dug it, But here's the thing, that if you separate a child at 3 or 4, I had to learn this, has to see all his or her feelings in different characters, so you can look at them. So if you look at Red Riding Hood, you have Little Red Riding Hood, the innocent, her mom, who's authority, the wolf, who eats everybody, the hunter who saves the day, the grandma. So you have all these personalities. And they are really constellated in one thing. I have all those qualities inside of me. But if I'm a little kid, I want to see it out there in different characters. And it helps me integrate it into myself. So that was kind of the magic behind what we did in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So we wanted to show children through puppets how the different feelings that people have. And Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, there were two things at a time. You probably didn't see Sesame Street that much, but Sesame Street was 1, 2, 3, cognitive learning. And Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was, what do you do with the mad that you feel when you feel so mad you could bite? That's affective learning. Two different things entirely. And at the time, there was no affective teaching going on. That it's okay to have feelings, that it's okay to be sad. So Fred would do a thing about the goldfish being dead. We'd do a thing about death. That those things weren't happening at the time. So he simply saw what was missing, and Fred's knowledge of childhood psychology was his way of taking that and bringing it out to into play in stories. And I'm going to show you a picture here of Fred with his. I'll try. He worked with a child psychologist, Dr. Margaret McFarland. And I'm going to show you a picture of Margaret. He and Margaret together. I can find it. Okay. That's Fred's office, and it's a tiny office. And there she is. That's Margaret McFarland, and Fred's meeting with her. Fred didn't have like a regular office, like with a desk and stuff. It was just a real narrow little place where we worked. He had a couch, had a chair, and one other kind of a red Barca lounger over there. That was it. That was the three things in his office. And he had a little house in Nantucket, so those are the whales. But Margaret was the boss. She understood in an intellectual way the child, what a little preschooler would need to figure out. Now I'll give you a real quick example. I did a series of shows on work, and I had to teach economics to a 4-year-old. Okay, so I said, I'm going to do this. So I talked to Margaret, and we were just kind of reviewing it at a very rough level. She said, well, you know, it's supply and demand. She had a little tiny voice. And she said like this, it's supply and demand. And that toilet training's a good example of that. You have to listen real carefully. And the child has it, and the parent wants it. Supply and demand. And it's water management. And I'm just there, oh my God. My brains are like spinning. And she's right about all that stuff. So it was my job to take that and to interpolate it into some kind of storyline in the neighborhood and make believe and all that. So, and Fred had to do that all the time with her. So in my particular case, I did a series of shows about they had to dig a swimming pool in the neighborhood of make believe. Okay, and they have enough money to dig the pool, but not enough to put in the plumbing. So Southwood has to come up with. So I have this whole convoluted thing. So they dig down in, they get the thing dug, and they spring a leak. And water starts to come up. So it's just that's the drama of it. Okay. So there's water management going on here. So then you go back out to when you're out in the Fred's house, not in the neighborhood of Maple Leaf. There, I had a scene where he walks out through the kitchen out to the back where there's a sand table, and he makes a little thing with the sand. So let's just see if we can make a little hole here, and he pours water in it. And he pours a little bit too much, so it starts to leak out. He says, oh, it's going out. Oh, well, I can just move my hand here and keep it from going. So he's managing water, okay? See? So meanwhile, the bullshit detector in the kids is flat. You don't get it. Okay? But we're pumping that out. We're teaching that you can manage you can manage things. You can handle stuff. And there's always going to be an adult to help you. All this stuff's happening. Which made me very happy working on the show to be able to satisfy Margaret. And I got away with it, but it was I was sweating bullets because I was not used to writing scripts like that. Part of the reason they hired me was that I wrote some screenplays that worked out, that Fred liked how I wrote. And I directed as well, but writing was what I did the most in my. And I'm going to show you another picture here of I'm going to find it. Okay, is this the neighborhood? Oh, that's me. Back when that's XCL's tree and stuff, right? You might recognize it. But I'm wearing a headset that weighs about 90 pounds. Here's one of Fred and I playing in the Joe Negri's music shop. And I'll talk a little bit more, but then I want to just answer questions and stuff that you may have about the neighborhood. And you might remember the model. Whoops, well, that's a better shot. So you're looking down. This is Fred's house. And you can see where we built it up on a platform. And there's the little houses and where the trolley would move by. And the cameras. I'll show you something else there. Let me see, this is, I like this, and especially of Fred and John Costa. Music played a large part in the neighborhood, and we had one of the best jazz musicians, I think, in the world, Johnny Costa. And Fred wrote all the music and all the songs, but Costa would arrange them. So he has a little Celeste there, and an electric piano, and a regular piano. And they were just, these two guys were like that. And Fred used music, just like we respond to songs and stuff. Well, children certainly, and you know that if you have kids and grandkids, that they respond to music. And it worked so well in the neighborhood. And one other thing I want to share. When I first, before I went, okay, that's actually Ciao Italia, so that's Fred and Joanne, his wife, Joanne, and they were really a team. And that's his little house called the Crooked House. And it's called Crooked because it's also old and kind of cracked like that. And he would go there in the summer and write scripts. And then we would do our work. But he was a very private man when it came to writing. And he would, when I was there, we did 15 programs a year and do them in blocks of 5. And it would be a week on work, a week on divorce, a week on going to school, a week on, thematic stuff. And we did operas. I don't know if any of you remember the Mr. Rogers operas, but they were pretty big deals. And I did 4 of those. And my father died because we had a very small team. I'm going to show you. Oh, that's in Russia. Let me find one more here that's going to be more evocative. This was when Fred would sit and talk to the camera, people would be astonished that he was reading off teleprompter, because it was so natural, just like I'm just blabbing. But it was, the words were so important to him that it wasn't a teleprompter. And he was going to go over the script here at this point, and he's just getting ready to do his interiors. We called them the interiors. That's where and they were the hardest work for him. He liked doing neighborhood make-believe stuff because he'd run around in his sneakers and not have to be Mr. Rogers. He could be Fred Rogers and do puppetry and things like that. But in the interior, every word counted. And we would change things at the last minute and make it just completely accurate. Because while the neighborhood make-believe was the play side, when he spoke to you, and that's sharing problem, that's when it affected you, because he would look into that lens and it was riveting. And he could do that because he understood that one of the basic rules of human nature is that people can love and be capable of being loved, and that children especially, it's that simple, that if he would demonstrate that to kids. And I remember when he would, if he was here right now and he would talk to you, there wouldn't be anybody else in the world but you. He would just be talking to you. All the blinders would shut down and you'd just be, you just talk to him. And I watched a lot of accomplished reporters come in and do stories on Fred, and sometimes he was just so good at it that he'd just be listening to them, and the minute he heard something that was interesting, he would find the thing you were most proud of. He was like panning for gold. He'd find it, and boom, he'd talk it right back to you. He'd say, when you said that, and I'd watch reporters, just start to talk and talk. They're doing all the talking, and they're trying to shut up, but they couldn't because he just kept, he kept drawing it out of them. And his face, he'd look at you. Because he liked it. He enjoyed people, and he practiced what he preached. And some of you probably know he was an ordained Presbyterian minister, and that was his standard. But he was spiritual. He wasn't religious. Because he and I were very good friends, and we would go to different churches and stuff sometimes just to check it out. He loved it. He loved how people worship different ways, and he would. And generally in Pittsburgh, people wouldn't mob him. They knew Fred. He was just he could get away with it, at least in Pittsburgh. And Fred also was very active with children, Children's Hospital and things like that. And he would go out sometimes, maybe once or twice a month. We'd go over to Children's Hospital, and I'd go with him sometimes. And we'd go into the wards and talk to kids. And so one night we were driving over there, and he had this big Buick. He called it the Bishop's car, because it's this big, I don't know where he got this big ass thing. He's just driving along. And he said, you know, just very calm. He said, can you tell me if that stoplight up there, is that red or green? And I said, it's green, Fred. He said, thank you. You know, and I kept driving, and I'd been there 3 years. And it occurred to me, I said, Fred, you're colorblind. He said, well, yeah, I am. And I said, I couldn't believe it. And so he's just driving along, and I said, I opened my mouth to say something. He said, would you be more comfortable driving tonight? And I said, I sure would. I sure would. So he pulls over, and then I drove and stuff. And I should have known better that he is colorblind. So when he would come in, these are inside, so he would go in and take his jacket off and reach for the sweater. Okay? So the rule was, you had all his sweaters his mom knitted in the closet. There would be an empty hanger, and always the sweater to the right of the hanger would be the one to wear, because they all look like that to Fred. You know, so all those different colors. So if ever you see the show again, when he reaches in, you'll always see him pick that sweater on the right, and away he goes. And his mom knitted all of them, and she knitted sweaters for not just Fred. She'd knit maybe 10 sweaters a year. And she's this tiny person, and this is a great story, not a great story, but we would go there on Thanksgiving. My wife Connie and the kids by then were 7 and 9, something like that. And we'd go to Fred's for Thanksgiving at his house in Latrobe, which was not in Pittsburgh, which is a little bit out of town. And that was the family house. So we would go in, and by then his mom had passed away, and we'd have Thanksgiving dinner, etc. And Fred was a vegetarian. And my daughter Gabriel was not real keen on turkey, it was not her favorite thing. So everybody sits down, there's a big crowd there. And so the turkey comes in, and out comes, it was lobster bisque for Fred and for Gabriel. They would get that they said, Gabriel's English. So dinner's over, she's like, hi. And Fred would say, okay, girls. And both Sarah and Gaby hop up, and they tear upstairs and go down to Fred's mom's room, which she'd passed away, into the closet. And in the closet were a ton of cocktail dress-up stuff that the mom, and she was so tiny that they fit on the girls. So they would go in and dress up, and you never knew what they were going to bring. And down they'd come clumping down in their high heels and this long black stuff. It's just wonderful. And Fred's face to see the girls wearing his mom's cocktail dresses was just, it was priceless. And that's the kind of, it was just kind of fun. And the girls, which I don't have a photo here, Gabriel and Sarah grew up with Fred, and they worked in the neighborhood. They painted the dots, on the little neighborhood make-believe path and stuff. So that was their fun. And I had 10 years there, and my original kind of comments were going to be that my career started with having lost my other job. And I was out of work because the company I worked for folded in D.C., and I had little kids, and my wife and I decided we were going to raise, she was going to stay at home instead of working, so she quit her job, and there I am, like no money. So I'm doing anything I can find. And I was doing an ad for Citizens Bank of Maryland, and I was meeting with these shady characters in Alexandria, Virginia, and they wanted to make a movie called The Senator's Wife, and this is like in 1980. So I kind of read through the script, and I can't remember if movie ratings were out at that time or not, but I can tell you that it was like at least a XXX movie back then. And I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, and this is so weird, I said, I don't care, I had worked in McDonald's in my life, I didn't want to do that again. I carried mail. I said, okay, well, somehow this is going to work out. I know what it was, but I'm going to do a budget on it and start working on it. And that very same day, I came home and read Broadcast Magazine, looking for jobs, of course, and it said, wanted television director for children's show, apply box 337N. So, send in the resume. A week later, the phone rings, and it says, hi, this is Basil Cox. This is Paul Lally. Yes, it is. I'm with Family Communications. As soon as he said that, I said, well, that's got nothing to do with the senator's wife. I know that, Family Communications. And I said, I had no idea who this was. He said, we produce Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And we like what you sent us, and you're one of our finalists, and you also know that you're a writer. So would you send us a writing sample? I said, oh, sure. On the phone. But I still remember this day. I'm going to finish this budget. I'm going to put the bid in, because I always wanted to be, I said, because I don't know. It's all going to work out. And so I did. A week later, I ended up meeting with Fred, and he had me read part of what I'd written from the screenplay. And I asked after we'd met and talked and stuff, and everybody else, but just he and I. And it was about a little soliloquy over a grave site and a person reading about children and whatever it was. And he thanked me. He said, wonderful. He stood up, and I stood up. And we shook hands. He said, thanks very much for coming. And I'm waiting for the bums rush, So I'm going out. And he kind of gestures me to the door. And I go out the door. And I'm getting ready just to keep on walking. And I felt his hand. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, to Basil Cox ahead of me, he said, we have our director. And I can remember being so relieved because I had a job. B, I never know to this day whether or not the senator's wife was produced. I have no clue. But I do know that I direct 125 programs at Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and I'm very proud of that. So that's kind of how I want to do the story, but I want to end it there and open it up to questions and stuff. But here I am, I'm that guy. So, questions? Any?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed reading the book that the biography of Russell King. Just read that, and the article in Esquire magazine from 25 years ago. I can't remember the article.
I can't either, but Can You Say Hero was the name of the article.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, Judd. No, is it Judd? Well, it's okay. But he's in the movie. The fella.
But one of the stories from one of those sources talked about Margaret McFarland.
Yeah.
Dr. McFarland. And they made a point of saying if something came up that Fred wasn't sure about, he would stop filming in the middle of filming. Mm-hmm. And she was located nearby across the street or something?
Well, she lived in the Pittsburgh area with a phone call away. Yeah. Very rare, but that's how, well, I think he used that to say how much she was his muse, his back, she had his six, as they say in fighter pilot, she knew. And Fred's job, as it was mine in a tiny way, is that we had to make a creative sort of interpretation of bedrock principles of children, early childhood education. She was with, if you know Dr. Spock, Dr. Spock, she was a contemporary. She studied with Benjamin Spock and Terry, forget this other guy's name. She was a force. And I'll tell you a story about Mark. She's about that big and lived in East Liberty, which is through the tubes in Pittsburgh. And it's like on the other side of the hills. And I was looking for a place to stay, and I was thinking about living over there. And I said, Margaret, how long does it take you to get in to work? She said, about 20, maybe 15 minutes at the most. Well, that's pretty good. And then I found a place in town and decided about something else. So one day I'm stuck on the other side of the mountain trying to get in. Traffic backed up every morning. It's like I'm like an hour just sitting there every day, but I'm there for at least an hour. And at one point I'm sitting there and I see this car booming down the breakdown lane. And this little teeny head. and she moved through time and space and nobody got in the way. But had I done that, I wouldn't Margaret, so I would have been new. But she was brilliant. She was and a wonderful woman. I learned the word empathy from her. Because she said one day, you you seem to me to be very empathic. Thank you. I didn't know what it meant, but I looked it up. And I am empathic, but I didn't know that at the time. So, did I answer your question? Yep, he would do that. Really, how much he relied on her. Not when I was there. I never saw
That really struck me, that if it was important that he wasn't sure,
Oh, yeah.
he would seek her out. And
Yeah, because he knew the impact of his, as you know what, and he knew how important it was an adult to talk to a child, just like it is for you. We have a huge responsibility, and so he felt that way. But we all do. It's not. I always say, if ever I get a chance to talk to, we're all like little Mr. Rogers, you know. People, it's our you know, we're able to love and be loved, and to demonstrate that to a child. You can't go wrong, because you're like a god to them, you know. So,
Who were the girls at Thanksgiving? Were they Fred's girls?
no, my girls, Sarah and Gabriel, my daughters,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
who are now in their 40s. They have families, and it worked out okay. And it was wonderful for them to experience it with Fred.
Yeah.
And
Paul, do you know anyone, as in this day and age now, that the time we're in,
it has that effect, or doing
that
what
has
Fred
that
said?
effect on children? Is this a huge space that's been made in Fred's absence that we've kind of strayed too, far? Who are kids
Well,
looking
yeah.
to get that affirmation?
And more importantly, what avenue? Because look how many, the social media, look how diffuse media is now. It's gone from, 2 channels to 4 to 50 to 200, so it's diffuse. And I don't ever see that happening again at that sort of intensity. You can't. I mean, they do a Daniel's Neighborhood, which is an animated series,
Yeah,
which is good. Kids like it, and that works.
it's a cartoon, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's animated because it's less expensive to produce.
Oh,
Yeah.
is that
A lot less expensive. And not that we were expensive, but now day and age. Now every year, I mean, our budget was $1.3 million, which sounds like a lot, but it's not. And every year, Fred just said, I don't know, every year was a gift that we got it from. And he produced maybe, I don't know, he got 40 years. I was only there 10 years. I was there, as I mentioned to Sharon earlier, during Fred's Cary Grant phase. He looked great. His hair was silver. Everybody knew who he was. And I'd lick up the phone and I'd say, I'm the director for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's as soon as I'd say that, oh yeah, I know what it is. I go, oh, thank God. Because so much of television is just, trying to get somewhere and nobody knows who you are. And you just, if I had a nickel for every bullet I've sweated doing this. And it was such a relief for 10 years to work with, everybody knew who it was. And it was just, and so sorry, I got way too many stories. We're out in a field with a cow and a guy somewhere in Pennsylvania. Fred had forgotten his sneakers. For Christ's sake, he left them back in Pittsburgh. We've flown out, we're gone. And we're supposed to do a sequence with a farmer and this woman who had this dairy farm, and she's going to show Fred how the machine works and all this stuff. But we're outside the barn, and it's supposed to be the intro where Fred looks up and hides my neighbor, and you see him head to toe, so he's got to have his sneakers. So we get on the phone the night before, blah, blah, talk, so, they FedEx sneakers. So we're there in the morning getting ready to do it, and and this FedEx truck, it was like a movie. Goes, and then the guy jumps out, and he's not holding the box, he's holding his sneakers. Because we take him out. He said, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Rogers. Goes running towards Fred, and Fred, well, thank you very much. And then, so that's the sort of impact. That's a good example of people knew who he was. So he was so happy to see Fred. I was happy. Because I'm out there just you're just like herding cats when you direct. You just got everybody doing a million things. And in the end, it's all about Fred and how he works with the person. And he used to hate it sometimes because I would kind of loosey-goosey how I direct them. I said, we're going to go over here, we're just kind of do this. Because if I was real rigid and said, do here and go to here and all this stuff, he would turn into a stick man because he didn't like And walk around. And I think to myself, why do I do this? Why don't I just throw him in the pool, trust him, he's been doing this longer than me. But he always gave me that look, because he wanted me to be rigid, and I wouldn't. But,
So how long had he been doing the show before you started?
about, I think 15 years, something like that. And he had gone out of production. In the documentary, you learn that he thought, well, that was it. I'm just going to do reruns. I want to do this now with grown-ups, and that tanked.
Yeah.
And then, and in the movie, talks about a child who pretended to be Superman and jumped off a building and got killed. But he came back and we did the theme stuff, and that's when I came on board. So we do a whole week going back to school, play, do a theme on music. So you'd have a storyline Monday through Friday, and we would do that. But always, 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 Fred's central theme was that people are capable of being loved, and he would pound that into a kid's head. All these songs, everything was related that way. Feeding the fish, because it just wasn't available. Kids didn't hear that, at least not in a formative way.
Are you still in touch with anyone from the show?
Yeah, for me, I am, yeah. Nicky Tallow, the guy says Nick. Yes, it's not. It's Nick, what you saw. You may have seen him in the film. Oh, I keep getting. There, that's Nick. Nick Tallow. He was in the film. He's the one talking about, he takes a picture. If you've seen the film, Nick's role was, Fred would, he would come to the door. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. He walked to the door. He's waiting on the other side of the door. Johnny Costa plays the intro music. You see the zoom into the houses and the trolley. Then we dissolve and Fred comes in and starts, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. So while he's out here standing, Nick would stand next to him, because he was the floor director, waiting, and he's telling a joke to Fred. Always a joke. And always a way off color jokes. Fred's just there. And Fred Fred loved Nicky, and Nicky could tell a joke. And so, most of the time, Fred could go through the door. The deal was, no matter how funny it is, I'm still going to go through the door. It's a beautiful day. So, and one day he comes in. It's a beautiful day. Just like this, and he walks into the door because it was so good. Nicky got him. And he's the one. Nicky would go around and take pictures of guys, moony people. He took a picture of.
That's in the film.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll know this if you saw the film. And he tells the story in the film. He's a wonderful man. And he has tattoos everywhere. He was like an original biker. Nowadays, body markings is big deal. He was a terrific guy. And in Pittsburgh, oddly enough, there's a lot of feature films are shot there. Because it looks like, I call it like freeze-dried New York. It looks like it's all city stuff. And Nick was a great, what they call a dolly grip. When you see a camera on wheels and stuff, it's that person pushing him. That dolly grip has to be so talented, and he was wonderful at it. So he did a lot of work when he wasn't in the neighborhood. But he's one of the fellows who I stay in touch with.
Where is he from now?
Nick is from Pittsburgh.
He's in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, he lives in Pittsburgh. Still at it, and he was in George Romero had the Night of the Dead. There's a whole original zombie movies that were done in Pittsburgh. So it was wild.
When he appeared before Congress,
Yeah.
how was he able to mesmerize the senator to change his mind?
He was like Daniel the Lions did, wasn't he?
That was amazing.
He was, well, you saw part of Fred, and if you've not seen it, General Pastore was going to kill the CPB funding for public television, and Fred showed up. And Pastore by then he didn't want any more people reading stuff to him. So Fred he went off script. And man, I'm telling you, you saw the steel in Fred. And he said the words, to the song, what do you do with the mad that you feel when you feel so mad you could bite? Which, I love that line. And he does the whole thing to Pastore, and at the end, Pastore says, you got your money. Just like that. Now, Fred did a thing when Joan Rivers, and I was there when he did this, not in NBC, but he appeared on the Tonight Show. He would do this, and Carson wasn't around, so Joan Rivers was substituting. And Fred was just, so he shows up and he sings, I mean, he's promoting, I think it was a new book, but then he sings a song to It's You I Like, to Joan Rivers. It's not the things you wear, it's not the way you do your hair, but it's you I like. And then it's not the, it's not your jokes, they're just beside you. But he's just singing to her. And she had put on a sweater to be Fred, kind of like being a wise guy. She's wearing a sweater like Fred. But he starts singing to her. And at one point, I mean, it really, you could see that it actually moved the camera around to get an over-the-shoulder shot of Fred singing to her. And she just goes, she was like this. She just put her sweater over her head because she was so moved by it. And of course, everybody loved it and all that stuff. So he gets back to Pittsburgh and he talked to me. He said, it was like Daniel and the Lion's Den. I sat there and all I could do was look at her fingernails, these long red fingernails. He said, I was so scared that I thought I just have to sing to her, you know. And it worked. But he was just, and he was he weighed 147 pounds, 147 pounds. I think 1/4. It's, wait a minute, 143 pounds. So there's numerology. Fred liked numbers. 143 is I, is 1 letter. Love is 4 letters. U is 3. I love you. And he weighed 143 pounds. And he went swimming every day and he'd weigh himself. And that was the deal. And I've got to tell you this. When I drove to Pittsburgh to start work from Washington, D.C. I was so excited to work there. I didn't even know where Pittsburgh was. I flew there. So when it came time to drive, I drove from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh. Jesus, like 12 hours. I said, Pennsylvania will never end. It's like Western Pennsylvania. So I finally get there at like noon or something. And I'm all, you know what it's like on the turnpike. So I come in and say, Freddie, good to see you. Good. He said, let's go. You want to go swimming? Because he swam every day. I said, okay, that'd be great. So why not? So and I used to be a lifeguard, so I know how to swim and all that. So we went to the Pittsburgh Athletic Club. Men only, ladies. Men only. And I think they now allow women. But back in the day, gentlemen, it was like living in Athens, Greece, where you swam in the nude. Oh yes. Gentlemen swam in the nude. Now, if you don't know, this is the truth. So I'm in there in the locker room and I thought, uh-oh. I remember it's like my YMCA days, you know, when I was a little kid. Whatever they used to say, you swam, because they said the chlorine in the water, blah, blah. So I said, I'm going to go swimming. Holy cow. So what am I going to do? I'm hired. I never saw anything below that. There were no tattoos, I'll tell you that. I didn't see Fred's pee-pee. I went out, I remember going up to the edge of that pool, and I said, well, here I go. I'm in a new life, I'm just going to do this. Just dove in. Fred was just, it was worth it. But
What year was that? When did you start?
Pardon me?
What year did you start?
1981.
81.
81 through 90, yeah.
It was still better than your X-rated movie, though.
Pardon me?
It was still better than your X-rated movie. You know.
But I just say, it was just like, this is a surreal thing. And all the gentlemen, it was like Athens. So what? Okay, guys. No thanks. I don't know if it's still around, but that's 25 years ago. But,
what was one of your favorite productions? One that stuck out to you that you did with him?
I liked, I will not say the ones I wrote because they were too nerve-wracking. I enjoyed anytime Betty Aberlin talked to Daniel on the clock, okay? Mm-hmm. Daniel on the clock scenes. That Fred was really a master puppeteer. But these are little stiff sock puppets, and that's not a big deal. And one day he said, it's not the puppet, but it's Betty's belief in the puppet, Betty Aberlin's belief, that makes Daniel work. And when he said that, I remembered that. And there's a lot of scenes, if you see Betty with Daniel, the stuff I directed, that I always made sure that if Daniel said at some point in the line, she said, but why, Daniel? I said, well, because I'm afraid, or whatever the line is. I'd never have a close-up of the puppet saying, well, I'm afraid. But I have her looking at him. That's a two-shot. And he'd say, I'm afraid, and it'd be her reacting like that. And it made the scene work. So what I loved was if we look at playback, I'll show you that was one thing we always did when we looked at the shows. It'd be nice if I could see, but I can't. That we would all gather around and look at the play. We'd play the videotape back, and I don't see it. There we go. So there's Fred looking up, and he's looking at an interior scene. But Margie, the producer, me, Bobby Vaughn, one of our cameramen, Art Ogle. And the deal was that, we'd look at it, and if it was good, we'd move on. And generally it was good, we'd move on, but always would look at it. And when we would look at playbacks with Betty and Daniel at the clock, that would be my favorite time, because I would just kind of look at everybody's looking. And these are all grown-ups just like that, watching, because she was such a fabulous actress. And Fred was so good, and the scenes were so well written that were very rewarding.
So you looked at each scene
Segment,
or
yeah, like if it's Betty at the clock, or Exthal at the tree, or in this case, Fred's intro to one of the segments. We go back in, and here is a teleprompter, it's a little camera looking at this paper with the printed words, and then the teleprompter is up here, and a mirror, and so Fred would come to the door and he could read off the prompter. But he was such a great writer that sounded like he was just talking. And I learned at the foot of the master how to write, so that I'll spend an hour with any of you here. Once I get it, I can write and it'll sound like you're talking, and you'll think it's you, because you develop that ear. And mostly it's not what you don't write. So you write all the stuff out, then you remove the and and stuff, and because when we talk, we just give up so much stuff. We just jump around. And that's how Fred would write. And that's a good example. There's the mirror of the teleprompter there, and there's a TV monitor, and it would reflect up. There's the screen, it bounces out. So this is ancient. It's a little bit more simple nowadays.
What would he think of the documentary?
Did I?
What would he think of
Oh,
it?
would he think? I think he would enjoy it. He would love it, because the guy who produced it really got to the kernel of Fred's philosophy of life. In my opinion, he really nailed it. And I'm sorry I didn't get an Oscar. Should have. I think it showed all the, if you will, all the different puppet characters, meaning King Friday, Elaine, all the aspects of Fred Rogers. That all of us have these personalities, and we're complex things in people. And Fred was able to take them all apart and pull them all together over and over and over. And in doing that, he showed children that it's possible. Because when you're little, it's still kind of like a lot of chaos going on to see a grown-up integrating it. And I'll use one other quick example. Picture, which how people make marbles, how people make bicycles, how people make things. I did a ton of those. And one of Margaret McFarlane's rules was, there are no headless horsemen. That meant you didn't just have hands building stuff. If you watch how-to stuff, you don't see the people. So two things you do there. You integrate, you show that at the end of every every picture, Fred would always sing, everything goes together because we are one piece. The nose, the people are one piece. But you would see marbles being made from you'd see things apart being put together.
Right.
And if you saw them, you would always have people. You'd see faces. And whenever Fred visited, like we went to the graham cracker factory, we called it a visit. So Fred's with somebody, rather than just my showing a person painting a tricycle. So Fred would be there, and he would always, stand next to a person in the assembly line or whatever and talk about it. And he would always say, "Do you ever think about who might use this?" And he would get people to talk. But what we're showing children is that grown-ups make stuff, and that their moms and dads, it's just small. And it really felt good to be associated with a program that was doing that, and doing good. Because, and I've been fortunate in my career to be in public television the whole time, and not, I've been able to do stuff that I think is worthwhile. I do a cooking show now. I've done it for 26 years now. Who doesn't like food, right? What's two universal things in the world? Eating food and smiles and a kid. What the hell? That's it. You can't go wrong with food. So I love that part, and I bring what I learned from the neighborhood to Ciao Italia, because Mary Ann is as nuts about cooking as Fred was about loving children. She just loves to cook, loves to show you how to do it, and she never says she's a chef. She says, "I'm a cook." And what's universal? Well, the smile and food. And food. Well, Fred loved food. It's sad that he had stomach cancer, and that's kind of cruel irony that he died of stomach cancer. But he loved to eat, and he never ordered anything when we went out shooting. So, but the crew's there, and here's the deal. So you open up the menu, and you're sort of talking about, he said, "Well, what's good?" We're talking, and you're talking stuff, and he'll say, "Oh, that sounds interesting." Someone says, "Okay, I got to order scallops with béarnaise or whatever he likes, so that all the food comes, and everybody kind of shares. It's not too much like a food riot, but a lot of sharing going on, including Fred with his little plate. He said, "Well, you might have had just a little bit of that, a little bit of that." And it just, he would turn a simple meal into more of a kind of not a food fight, but a fun experience with the crew. But I learned that early on. So. That he liked to eat. And he owned Vegetarian Times, which is still a publication that Family Communications bought it. And for one thing, Mr. McFeely, Fred came from a family, McFeely Brick Company in Pittsburgh. And they're very successful manufacturing, a lot of bricks everywhere. And Fred was born in the time with the Lindbergh baby kind of era, where they stole a Lindbergh baby and the baby died, and it was terrible. So Fred had a very protective childhood until Elaine when Fred was 9 or 11, I forget which, Elaine gets adopted. And that's when his world ended. He stopped being king of the hill, and Elaine came in. And it's when he also got into puppetry and became a little more loquacious. It was tough. It's like a shotgun presentation, I'm sorry. But I know a lot of stuff. I got like 1,000 stories, so.
Can you talk about his music?
He went to Rollins College in Florida, and every song you heard on the neighborhood he wrote in the lyrics. And he's a very talented musician. His wife Joanne's a pianist as well. And Joanne and her friend, you've heard of dual pianists who, there's a lot of music written for two pianos. In Fred's house, there were two, and Joanne worked with a woman, Janine Morrison. And once the kids were grown or enough, they could tour. They toured as dual pianists, Janine and Joanne. But in Fred's house, if you walk in, you walk down to this kind of a real big living room, and in there were a grand piano and a baby grand. And you know how grands are bent like that. It was just so cute to see them both like nestled that way. And there they were. It's kind of emblematic of their marriage. But Fred would play, and then Joanne, they would play back and forth. So it was really wonderful to see. And she met him at Rollins College in Florida. That's where they met. And she's just abundant, joyful kind of, I just remember her mouth, this great big smile. and one of her boys, Johnny, in the film, is like, looks just like his mom, and music was just huge for Fred. You know, he said in the film that he would feel it down to his fingertips. If he was angry or whatever, he would do that on the show a lot. So. And the girls would sing. My daughters they do songs and stuff at Thanksgiving. They do little performances. Oh my God. It was like 1942 or something. It was like another era with Fred, with kind of, entertaining in the house and stuff. So. Oh yeah, so one other thing. Okay, so Johnny Costa was incredibly talented jazz pianist, and it was. So one day, it's not funny, this is serious. He had got like heart palpitations a little bit. People got a little bit concerned in the neighborhood. We're in the middle of production. So he went over and I laid him. I'm laughing because it turned out okay. I put him on the couch here. He's just laying there, kind of resting. And everybody was sort of, I don't know, when things get tense, everybody sort of backs off. And my job as a director in a television studio, a guy told me one time, he said, "You're the hammock. You click yourself here, and you click yourself here, put everybody in the middle, and you just swing." So I said, "Okay, it's time for me to be the hammock." So I went over and sat down next to Johnny on the couch. It was kind of hard because it kept sliding off. I said, "Johnny," and I was real serious at this point. This might be it. And I want to let you know that I love you and we love you. I was just like, because I thought maybe, okay, if this guy's going to go, I don't want him to go by himself. I mean, that's a real serious part of me. And I meant that from my heart. But Johnny's eyes just got, of course, got bigger and bigger. And I think he got better and better about that. It's never proved to be anything whatsoever cardiac related. So I felt a little bit embarrassed afterwards. But so all the time after that, he would see me and he'd go, "Not yet, not yet, not yet." So. But what a musician, God, Johnny, Jesus, he was just fabulous. He made that show, and one time he came back after Yo-Yo Ma's performance. So Fred said, "I want to come in the door, and I know Johnny can't stand it to be quiet. He hates silence." He says, "I'm going to come in, I'm going to see. I bet you $5 that he can't be quiet for more than 5 seconds." I said, I'll bet you 10 that he can. Fred just went. So we do this. So we did that other segment with Yo-Yo Ma months earlier. So we do the intro where Fred would go back from the house where Yo-Yo was. We dissolve. Fred goes in. My, that was wonderful. Wasn't Yo-Yo Ma wonderful? I just think, I want to sit here and think about this for a minute. Let's just think about that. And he just sat there. And he's just smiling. And I'm looking at the clock, in the control room. And he's just there. And probably, like 4 seconds, ring, da-da-ding, da-da-ding, da-ding. Johnny starts playing music. And Fred, he never cried. He just... And I think that was because he won $10. And that was the truth. Costa couldn't stand it. And it was an eternity. I didn't even do it that long here. You all got a little itchy. I did like 4 seconds. He did it at the Oscars, which they show in the movie, or when he got the Academy, or the Emmy. Yeah, it was an Emmy. And he did, and in the movie, he asked the people in the audience just to think about someone in their lives that helped them be who they were and got them to where. And at the end he said, "I'll watch the clock. I'll watch the time," or something. And it was a wonderful moment. I remember watching it live, and it was just people crying because they remembered. And in the movie at the end, those of you who've seen it, it's very moving that people are asked the same question. Who are you thinking about? Who was it? And that kind of thing. And it's very moving. So that was silence versus music. Long spiel.
Did Fred have acknowledge or have any interest in the shows about him, like I don't know if you remember Second City Television, which was a comedy group.
Long as it was funny.
Yeah.
And as long as it's funny, and long as it didn't happen during prime time to confuse kids. He didn't care. He loved them. Are you kidding? My brother who used to be in politics says, all ink is good ink. Even though it's bad, it's good. And Fred, he was a good businessman. He knew anything that promoted the neighborhood. Okay? But one time, the Burger King commercial was a guy comes out like Mr. Rogers, and it's a takeoff of Mr. Rogers and Burger King.
Yeah.
Well, it would be like someone set a stink bomb off at the company. Oh my God, he's doing this. And everybody's up and roaring. Did you see that? These are the people who I work with. And Fred, I still remember everybody gathered in this little tiny office where Fred was. And Fred's just there listening, to everybody, legal, and we'll talk to them, and they can't do this, we'll sue them. And he said, just find, would somebody, he just said, I could tell he'd had enough. He said, would somebody get me the name and the phone number of the person who I need to talk to about this? So within, 10 minutes, they had the director of the ad agency did the spot. And he said, this Fred Rogers calling. And I think it's, a very clever spot you produce. I'm concerned that a child will see this during the day and not be able to distinguish. So I'd be very appreciative if you just stop showing that spot. It's like 2 seconds of silence. Thank you very much, and I appreciate that. End of story. Spot gone. That's part one of the story, and it's gone. No blah, 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 this time. Fred just talked to him and it made sense. We're in New York filming Harlem Boys Choir or something. No, something, but we're there, and we're at some Broadway in 93rd or whatever, some crossing someplace. And in New York, people would really glom on Fred a lot. And we're crossing the crosswalk. In the middle of the crosswalk, this guy goes, Mr. Rogers. And I'm thinking, here we go again. I was the guy who did that spot for Burger King. And Fred said, it was wonderful. They're standing in the crosswalk, right, it's like, and the clock's ticking down. That was wonderful. You did great. And he said, yeah, but and Fred said, I'm very sorry that you're not going to get any residuals for that. And he meant it. He said, that's what bothered him, because you can make a lot of money with residuals. So I still thought, oh almighty, Fred could stay in the moment with a person so fast and see what was important, and then just move on. And we got there before the light changed. He did all that. This guy, when he goes up to the door and talks, just before he goes out the door at the end, by then we knew that this segment has to be 2 minutes and 19 seconds. Because back then, a show had to be 26 minutes and 46 seconds to the frame. So Fred would go up the door and we'd have maybe 8 seconds left. He said, there's nobody in the world exactly, and he would do his little homily, and then I'll see you next time, going out the door. Some days he'd just go right out the door because he was watching, because Nicky, who's not here, the floor director, is with he's got a 10-second cue, then he goes 10, and then just counting down like underneath the camera lens, going this, and then 2, 1, 1, and boom, Fred's out the door. It was just wonderful to watch him, to do this stuff, and it looked completely natural.
How do you happen to be in Maine? Do you
Oh, how I came here?
Yeah.
Well, after 125 shows, I ran out of gas at the neighborhood, and they also got rid of a full-time director. I got downsized. And so I said, now what? I could have worked in Pittsburgh. I didn't, because my brother lived in Littleton, New Hampshire, up north. And I loved New England. I subscribed like Yankee Magazine, oh, it's so pretty. Because it looks gorgeous.
What's your brother's name?
Well, Pat Lally. He lived up in Littleton. He's since deceased, but he moved down and away. But I started to build a camp up there, a little house up in Littleton. And by the time I didn't get very far with it, but then he moved down. But by then, I got a job at the University of New Hampshire to teach. I thought, that's it, I'm done. My laurel like Caesar going under Rome. I did the neighborhood. And I thought I was done. So I cashed in all my sizzle on that job. I got a job teaching and working at New Hampshire Public Television. And within a year and a half, the Ciao Italia thing just started to come up. And they went to the network, and they didn't have anybody to do it, and I knew how to do network stuff, so I took it over, and I hit it off with Mary Ann. And I went independent, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years later on my own. So we've been doing, that's how I came to New England. So, and yeah, the Yankee, I'll still look at a Yankee magazine every once in a while in the library. Yeah, oh, it's so pretty. Is that, I don't know if Dover doesn't quite look like that, but, but plus, I still remember being here for the first, I was here by myself for about a month before I could sell my house and the kids, and I would drive around at night, and you get me in the perfect summers like June or July. You have no idea how beautiful, Portsmouth can look like to a person from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where there's like only, 70 days of sun a year or something. It's just so pretty. And I just loved looking at the land, and I felt happy and scared shitless because I was on my own. I had all this, no more support. I was, New Hampshire Public Television. Fine, you do everything. Okay, yeah, I can do it. Well, I learned fast to edit again, and all the skills that I had were diffuse in the neighborhood. I had to, it was a smaller shop, but I made it. I'm vertical.
How do you stay so thin doing Mary Ann's show?
It's not easy. Was Mary Ann? Yeah. Oh, you wear a lot of
Good
black.
food.
That's very good. But yeah, Mary Ann did teach me how to cook. I'm a wicked good cook, and I think that helps. One of my daughters gave me one of those vacuum sealed things so you can suck the air out of stuff and freeze it. So my fridge looks like the International Space Station. I got all this shit in market. It lets all my OCD work. Roast beef, 10, 9, 18, and, oh yeah. But I think that helps.
Yeah.
But it's tricky. Well, I would say that Italian cuisine is real healthy. Mediterranean diet, fabulous.
That's true. Not what I eat, but I eat the fatty stuff.
Well,
Cheese and
yeah. Well, here's the thing with Italian food. If you go to Italy, and I've been in there a lot because we film over there, to ask you for spaghetti meatballs, they don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
They know what
that's true.
meatballs are, polpettone and pasta. Because that's Italian-American eating. When
Right.
people came to Italy to America from Italy, they said, my God, meat, look at all this meat. So, but over there, it's a very healthy diet. And I had no idea how good all the variety of Italian food is. And it's the most popular cuisine in America. Sorry, Fred, I'm selling chow now. But Fred loved food. He loved to eat stuff. Because he knew how important it was. Oh yes, last thing, I'll be done. The guy who hired me, who helped hire me, Basil Cox, the guy who called me long ago and said, I'm with Family Communications. Basil, about 2 years after I was there, got an offer to take over as the CEO for how'd you call it? Like a Friendly's or, a family restaurant chain in Pittsburgh. And he was conflicted because he was working with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, he didn't want to leave, but it was a great chance. And he since went on and did it and just had a great career in food. Here's what Fred said. He said, what could be more wonderful than being involved with food? A child's first experience with love is at the mother's breast or with the bottle. They form their opinion on whether life works or whether it doesn't in that intimate moment. He said, what could be more wonderful for you than to be dealing with families eating food? He said, like hypnotized Basil, because it's the truth. And Basil just floated out into his new job, and he did great. But that's how Fred could, he could dial into something and see the essence that no one else saw. And make no bones about it. I spend a lot of time going with this, because he was right. And I'm glad that I'm able to talk about it a little bit now. I know he would like me to say that all of us are little Fred Rogers running around. We really are. We have that ability and the opportunity. And next time I'm at a Hannaford's and I'm checking out my food, when I see that cashier, whoever, man or woman, I'll do my best to see that person, say, how you doing? Or howdy, just for a second, but I carry Fred on my shoulder when I do that, just to, so that person, and people respond. I know I do when it's done to me, so that's my tip of the hat, sir.
It's a wonderful message to end with. It's a wonderful message.
No, it is, and if I can do it, everybody can do it. Frank can
Thanks,
do it, you
Carl.
can do it. So,
Excellent.
I don't want to
Thanks
keep
so
you
much.
going.